Sirens screamed through the quiet suburban street at 7:42 p.m. Red and blue lights painted the houses in flashing chaos. Neighbors stepped onto their porches. Phones came out instantly. Curtains twitched. Within seconds, what had been an ordinary Thursday evening turned into a spectacle. 17-year-old Marcus Reed froze beside the black BMW parked in his own driveway. "Step away from the vehicle, hands where we can see them," an officer shouted, already unholstering his weapon. Marcus blinked, confused. He had just come home from basketball practice. His gym bag still hung off his shoulder. "This is my car," he said, voice shaking. "On the ground now." The command cracked like a whip. Marcus slowly lowered himself onto the pavement. The concrete was still warm from the sun. His cheek pressed against it as two officers rushed forward, one knee driving into his back. "Dispatch confirmed the vehicle is reported stolen," another officer said into his radio. "That is impossible," Marcus gasped. "It is registered to my dad." "Yeah, and who is your dad?" the officer muttered. Marcus hesitated. He had been raised not to use his father's position as leverage. His parents taught him integrity first, titles second. But right now, the asphalt scraped his skin and handcuffs bit into his wrists. "Director Reed," Marcus whispered. The officers laughed. "Director of what? The local grocery store?" A small crowd gathered across the street. Mrs. Langley from 2 houses down covered her mouth. Someone began screaming. Marcus' heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear the officers speaking over him. "Teen male suspect detained," one announced. The word suspect echoed in Marcus' ears. He had never been in trouble. Honor roll, varsity captain, volunteer at the community center. But none of that mattered as long as he lay face down in handcuffs. From inside the house, the front door opened. Footsteps, calm, measured. "Officers," a deep voice called out. "I believe you are looking for me." The officers did not immediately look up. "Sir, step back inside. This is police business." "It is," the man replied evenly. "Which is why I suggest you remove your knee from my son's spine." The tone changed, something in the air. The officer finally glanced toward the driveway. Standing there in a dark suit, no tie, sleeves slightly rolled, was Daniel Reed. Director Daniel Reed, recently appointed head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He had been sworn in just 6 days earlier. The officer's hand froze. Another officer squinted, recognition dawning slowly like a storm cloud forming. "No way," someone in the crowd whispered. Daniel Reed walked forward calmly, holding a leather folder. "That vehicle," he said, "is registered under my name. Federal security clearance attached. If you had run the VIN correctly, you would have seen that." Silence swallowed the street. The officer slowly removed his knee. Marcus was pulled to his feet, still cuffed. "I want the body cameras preserved," Daniel said quietly. "All of them." The officers exchanged nervous glances. "There must have been a mistake," one muttered. "Yes," Daniel replied, "there was." Marcus looked at his father's shame and relief battling in his chest. "Dad, I did not." "I know," Daniel said gently. "I know." The cuffs were removed, but the damage had already been done. The live stream had thousands of viewers now. Comments flooded in. "Another case. This is insane." They had guns drawn. The officers tried to regain composure. "We received an anonymous report that a young black male was attempting to break into this vehicle," I said stiffly. Daniel nodded slowly. "In his own driveway?" "Yes, sir. And instead of verifying ownership before drawing weapons on a minor, you escalated." The officer swallowed. Marcus' hands trembled. Red marks circled his wrists. Daniel turned to his son. "Go inside. Wash up." Marcus hesitated. "Dad?" "Inside." Marcus walked toward the house as whispers followed him. But Daniel did not move. He faced the officers with a calm that felt more terrifying than anger. "I have dedicated my life to upholding the law," he said. "I believe in accountability. I believe in fairness." The officers stood rigid. "But tonight," Daniel continued, "you reminded my son that no title, no achievement, no spotless record protects him from assumption." One officer looked down. Another shifted uncomfortably. "Who called it in?" Daniel asked. "We cannot release that information," the first officer replied automatically. Daniel tilted his head. "You can, and you will." The next morning, the video was everywhere. News outlets replayed the moment Marcus was forced onto the ground. The freeze frame of Daniel stepping out of the house in his suit became iconic within hours. Headlines blazed. FBI director's son mistakenly arrested in own driveway. Police draw guns on teen, did not know who his father was, but Daniel refused to let it become just another headline. He called a press conference. Marcus stood beside him. Cameras flashed. Myson was detained in his own driveway because someone assumed he did not belong, Daniel said into the microphones. This is not about my position. It is about a pattern. Marcus felt every lens pointed at him. I was scared, he admitted. I kept thinking, if I moved wrong, I might not get back up. The room fell silent. Across the country, families watched. Parents held their children tighter that night. The local police department launched an internal investigation. The anonymous caller was eventually traced. A neighbor, Mr. Collins, 2 houses down. He claimed he thought something looked suspicious. Marcus had waved at him earlier that week. The body cam footage revealed the officers had run the plate, but failed to check the full registration file before approaching with weapons drawn. Training manuals were suddenly under scrutiny. Talk shows debated bias. Law professors analyzed procedure. Activists demanded reform. But inside the Reed home, the conversation was quieter. Marcus sat at the kitchen table staring at his wrists. I did not tell them who you were, he said. Daniel nodded. I am proud of you for that. But maybe I should have. Daniel sat across from him. No. The point is you should not have to. Marcus swallowed hard. What if you had not been home? Daniel did not answer immediately. That silence said everything. Weeks passed. The officers involved were placed on administrative leave pending review. The police chief publicly apologized. Mr. Collins issued a written statement claiming he never intended harm. Marcus returned to school. Whispers followed him there too. Some students treated him like a celebrity. Others avoided eye contact. One afternoon, as he walked to practice, a younger kid approached him. Were you really scared? The boy asked quietly. Marcus paused. Yeah, he said honestly. I was. The boy nodded. My mom says it happens a lot. Marcus forced a small smile. Then maybe we changed that. Meanwhile, Daniel pushed for mandatory bias retraining initiatives nationwide. He met with civil rights leaders, police unions, legislators, not as a furious father, as a determined director. At a national conference, Daniel said, if this can happen in the driveway of the FBI director, imagine where else it happens without cameras. The room erupted in applause. But Marcus knew the applause was not enough. Change was slow. But the video never disappeared. Months later, the department announced sweeping policy reforms, revised escalation protocols, mandatory verification, before weapon display in nonviolent order reports, community oversight expansion. It was not perfect, but it was movement. On a quiet evening nearly a year after the incident, Marcus stood in the driveway again. Same house, same car. The sun dipped low. Daniel stepped outside. You okay? He asked. Marcus nodded. Yeah. He looked down the street. No sirens, no flashing lights, just neighbors mowing lawns. I used to think titles protected people, Marcus said softly. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. They do not, he replied. Character does. Courage does. Persistence does. Marcus exhaled slowly. You stepping out that night, he said. That changed everything. Daniel shook his head gently. No, he said. You getting back up did. Inside, the livestream clip still existed online. Millions had seen it. Millions had shared it. Not just because the FBI director stepped out, but because a teenager had been forced onto the ground for standing beside his own car. And because for once the world saw both the injustice and the accountability that followed. The driveway was quiet now. But the echo of that night never fully disappeared. It became a reminder that power can expose injustice, but courage transforms it. And sometimes the moment everything changes begins with sirens in the dark. The night never really left Marcus, even after the cameras stopped circling, even after the headlines were replaced by the next outrage, even after the department announced its reforms and the officers quietly returned to desk duty while the investigation findings were reviewed. Sleep became complicated. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard it again. On the ground. Now. The weight on his back. The cold snap of metal around his wrist. The way that concrete felt against his cheek. One evening about 3 months after the incident, Marcus sat alone in his room scrolling through the original video. He had avoided watching it in full for weeks. Clips were one thing. Seeing the entire 2 minutes and 38 seconds was another. He pressed play. There he was, frozen beside the BMW. Confused, harmless, The comments rolled past beneath the video. Glad his dad came out. Imagine if he did not. That officer looked ready to shoot. Marcus paused the video at that frame. The officer's finger was dangerously close to the trigger. His stance was aggressive, fearful. Marcus whispered to himself, I was not even running. A knock came at his door. Daniel stepped in quietly. You watching it again? He asked. Marcus nodded without looking away. I need to, he said. I do not want to pretend it did not happen. Daniel leaned against the wall. I testified in front of Congress today, he said. Marcus glanced up. About what? Use of force escalation patterns in nonviolent reports. Marcus gave a small, humorless smile. Daniel did not deny it. Yes, he said. There was no pride in his voice, only gravity. They showed the clip, Marcus asked. They did. Marcus swallowed. What did they say? Daniel crossed his arms slowly. Some called it an unfortunate mistake. Others called it systemic bias. A few tried to say the officers were just being cautious. Marcus looked back at the paused frame. Cautious, he repeated softly. A week later, Marcus returned to the driveway alone after practice. He stood beside the BMW again, deliberately placing his hands in his hoodie pocket the way he had that night. A police cruiser drove slowly past the house. Marcus felt it instantly, that tightening in his chest. His muscles stiffened. His breathing changed. The cruiser kept going. It had not even slowed down. But Marcus realized something painful in that moment. The fear was not about that specific night anymore. It was about knowing how quickly normal could become dangerous. At school, the administration invited Marcus to speak at an assembly about community relations and youth perspective. The auditorium was packed. He stood on stage staring out at hundreds of faces. I used to think if you did everything right, you would be safe, he began. You would get good grades. You'd stay respectful. You'd follow the rules. He paused. But that night, none of that mattered. The room was silent. I do not hate the officers, he continued carefully. I hate what fear can turn people into. A teacher in the front row wiped away tears. Fear plus assumption, Marcus added, is dangerous. After the assembly, several students approached him. One sophomore admitted his older brother had experienced something similar but never reported it. Another student said her father was a cop and did not believe bias existed until he saw Marcus' video. Conversations were shifting. Not everywhere, but somewhere. Meanwhile, the internal investigation results were finally released to the public. The report acknowledged procedural misjudgment and premature escalation inconsistent with department guidelines. Disciplinary action included formal reprimands and mandatory retraining. For many activists, it was not enough. For Marcus, it was not closure, but it was documentation. History written down mattered. One evening, Daniel sat on the back porch reading through policy drafts. Marcus joined him. You ever wish you were not FBI director? Marcus asked suddenly. Daniel looked up. No, he answered honestly, but I wish I did not have to prove why this matters. Marcus nodded. Do you think things will actually change? He asked. Daniel did not give a politician's answer. I think change is slow, he said, and I think it is uncomfortable. But I know silence guarantees nothing. Marcus leaned back in his chair. I do not want to just be the kid in the video, he admitted. You are not, Daniel replied firmly. You are the reason policies are being rewritten. Months later, the department implemented a new verification protocol named the Re-Review Standard, requiring full registration, confirmation, and situational assessment before weapon presentation in nonviolent property reports. The name made Marcus uncomfortable at first, but then he realized something. That night could have ended with tragedy. Instead, it ended with exposure. An exposure-forced conversation. On the one-year anniversary of the incident, a local reporter asked Marcus if he felt safer now. He thought about the question carefully. I feel aware, he answered. Safety should not depend on who your father is. The quote spread widely. That evening, Marcus stood once more in the driveway as the sun dipped below the rooftops. He placed his hands calmly on the roof of the BMW, not because anyone told him to, but because he refused to let the posture be owned by fear. A neighbor walking his dog paused. You are a brave kid, the man said. Marcus shook his head. No, he replied quietly. I just do not want the next kid to need a title behind his name to survive a misunderstanding. Inside the house, Daniel watched through the window. Not as the FBI director, just as a father. The sirens from a distant street echoed faintly in the evening air. Marcus did not flinch this time. He stood tall in the same driveway where he had once been forced down. The concrete no longer felt like a threat beneath him. It felt like ground reclaimed. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the flashing lights and policy reforms and televised debates, a quiet but powerful truth settled in. Real change does not begin when power steps outside. It begins when fear is confronted and refused by those who were never supposed to survive it.